Welcome back, weary travelers, to a journey through time designed to soothe your mind while awakening your curiosity. Tonight, we drift into a world often misunderstood, a realm of beauty, art, and profound hidden depth. Forget what Hollywood and hasty assumptions have taught you. Dim the lights, find your most comfortable spot, and let the gentle hum of history lull you into a new understanding. Tonight, we unveil the truth about geishas. The very word geisha conjures images for many: painted faces, elaborate kimonos, perhaps a hint of mystery, or even something more scandalous. For centuries, the Western imagination has struggled to grasp the true essence of these remarkable women. They have been romanticized, fetishized, and, most frequently, utterly misrepresented. But tonight, we're going deeper. We're peeling back the layers of misconception, one carefully chosen word at a time, to reveal the artists, the scholars, the businesswomen, and the cultural guardians who shaped a unique and vibrant tradition. So, before you drift too far, allow your mind to gently absorb the sounds and stories of a world far removed from your own. Let your understanding be gently reshaped. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an immersion. And when you finally close your eyes, perhaps you'll carry with you a clearer, more respectful image of these iconic figures. We begin our journey not with the women themselves, but with the profound, often bewildering misunderstanding that surrounds them. Let's begin by laying one stone with both hands, steady and plain. A geisha is not a sex worker. The word geisha is built from two characters, ge, meaning art, and sha, meaning person. Person of art. Imagine someone who trains for years to command conversation, dance, music, poetry, polite play, and the liturgy of hosts and guests that the tea ceremony choreographs so tenderly you can hear it. Imagine the self-possession required to balance tradition and improvisation, to read a room the way a musician reads a score, to wrap hospitality around guests so lightly they barely feel the thread. That is the core of the role. The body is present, of course. How else could anyone dance, bow, pour, or laugh? But the offering is art. Misconceptions grew like wisteria in places where truth had no trellis. The pleasure quarters of early modern Japan, those regulated neighborhoods where entertainment businesses clustered, were complex ecosystems. Courtesans lived there. So did tea houses, theaters, and houses where geisha were based. Outsiders, especially foreigners, saw proximity and assumed sameness. Later, in the lean years around and after the Second World War, some desperate women called themselves geisha to foreign soldiers because the word was recognized and the pay was survival. Films poured lacquer over confusion until it looked like certainty. But if you listen closely to the craft itself, the instruments, the dance steps, the etiquette, none of that confusion holds. A geisha's currency has always been time, taste, and technique. Pause here. Hear how the rain on the alley becomes gentler? Inside a tea house, a sugar crystal of sound shivers from a koto string. A fan opens with a soft susurrus. The night unknots. The story begins, surprisingly, with men. The earliest professional entertainers who would be recognized as ancestors of the geisha were male performers, jesters, storytellers, music men, who delighted banquet crowds with wit and timing. They were atmosphere makers, coaxers of laughter, lubricators of conversation, keepers of the night's rhythm. As cities swelled and the economy of pleasure refined itself, women entered the field with a different palette. Dance more delicate, song more varied, a conversational style equal parts sparkle and restraint. By the mid-18th century, female geisha had come to embody the profession, eventually eclipsing their male forerunners. Their stage was the banquet room, their curtain, the sliding paper door. Think of the era's energy. Edo, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka. Merchant fortunes rising, literati circles humming, theaters inventing new forms, the ukiyo-e printmakers slicing moments from the floating world and pressing them onto paper for anyone to prop against a window. In that world, the geisha became both mirror and lamp, reflecting taste, guiding fashion, and curating evenings that felt, to guests, like stepping into a poem written just for them. If you want to find the source of a geisha's poise, go back to the house where she learned to pour tea without showing the whisk of her pulse. An okiya is part home, part school, part business, its rhythms precise as the fold of an obi. The woman who runs it, the oka-san, is teacher, manager, and sometimes a second mother. New girls begin as shikomi, house trainees whose days are filled with chores and lessons. The chores aren't punishment, they are muscle memory for awareness. How a room breathes when the screen is slid just so, where the scent of fresh tatami sits in the air. Which guests put their glass down on the left instead of the right? In the evening there are lessons, dance, song, shamisen, conversation practice, the way a laugh can land lightly without bruising dignity. You can almost hear it, a wooden floor creaking under soft socks, a teacher's palm tapping time, the slight rasp of a brush writing a poem to be memorized. A dozen small arts accumulate into something larger than spectacle, an atmosphere of grace. The shikomi stage is humble, but even humility has a music to it, like the work song of a kitchen where broth simmers and knives sing. The girl watches older geisha leave at dusk with their hair finely dressed, kimonos flowing like a river of silk, faces luminous with the white foundation that is less mask than stage lighting. She sees how they return at midnight, tired, yes, but bright with the satisfaction that follows a well-played evening. When the time comes, the apprentice debuts as a maiko. Her appearance is signature, long-sleeved kimono, elaborate hair ornaments that catch each candle-lit breath of the room, makeup that turns her face into a calm moon. She is paired with a senior older sister who is guide and guardrail, showing her how to know when the table wants one more song or a moment of silence. In the first months, the maiko speaks less and listens more. Everything she needs to learn is in the room. The way an eyebrow lifts at a joke that has landed exactly right. The warmth drawn to the surface of a guest who is gently coaxed into sharing a story he never tells. Let's step inside one of those evenings, yes? The tatami is cool beneath the woven rush of your cushion. A low table stands before you like a raft. The host has chosen the season's flowers for the alcove and a scroll whose calligraphy suggests quiet endurance. The door slides, and the geisha enters with her maiko. They bow. The room bows back. There is no hurry. Hospitality moves at the pace of breath. Conversation begins with the weather, the honest kind, not filler. Cherry buds this year opened under fickle skies, another excuse to savor the first sweetness of seasonal sweets. A cup is poured because the way someone pours for you and the way you accept it are both forms of language. The shamisen appears. 3 strings become 5 moods. The song is not loud exactly. It does not need to be. It arrives like a friend who knows which corner of your day needed smoothing. A dance. The geisha's fan opens like a cloud, closes like a thought. She is not pretending to be someone else. She is showing you how time can be folded. A sleeve sways like willow. A wrist turns like a bird choosing a second path. A step suggests a journey you could take without leaving the mat. Stories are told, a small tale of getting lost between stations, the way a child's laugh turned a market into an amphitheater, a memory of snow the year the river froze, and how the city held its breath to hear the crack. Laughter comes, polite, then real. You feel the room exhale. Notice what is not here. There is no transactional tension. There is no bargain shivering under each smile. There is craft, and the craft is for its own sake and for the sake of the evening's whole. The guests, the hosts, the season outside. The memory everyone will carry away like warmth held in a teacup, even after the last drop is gone. Art without business drifts. Business without art hardens. Geisha walk the edge between the two with quiet fluency. A successful okiya is a ledger balanced with taste. Fees are set, reputations cultivated, patrons chosen with care. The geisha's image, her kimono choices, her musical specialties, the pace at which she accepts engagements, is not marketing in the modern billboard sense. It is reputation crafted like lacquer, layer by layer, each polished until it reflects without glare. Consider kimono. Beyond beauty, each garment is a financial instrument. Silk, dye work, hand-stitched details, seasonal motifs, these are investments. A geisha and her okawa-san decide how wardrobe expresses skill and standing, a subtler pattern as the artist matures. Bolder colors when a particular house wants to signal confidence, a whisper of gold thread the year a major patron celebrates a milestone. Hair ornaments, too, speak in their own calendar. Even the design of a comb nods to the month. If this sounds like haute couture, it is, except the runway is a tea room, and the show is never about the wearer alone. It is about the harmony of the evening. Clients book through a tea house that acts as an air traffic controller for evenings. Relationships matter, and so do boundaries. The confidence to decline is part of the craft. A geisha's calendar is curated so her art stays supple, not threadbare. Contracts are honored. Debts to the house are paid down through work. Independence is gained in increments until the artist can manage her own affairs. Over time, some open their own houses, mentor apprentices, and negotiate engagements with a hand that looks soft because it is steady. If you tilt your head just so, you can see the entrepreneurial line running through it all. Training is capital. Skill is interest. Grace is compounded daily. The currency is trust. Evenings are luminous. Daylight is linen, plain, clean, necessary. A geisha's day is an economy of preparation. Morning may begin with silent stretches to keep the back generous and the wrists gentle. The body is an instrument that must be tuned. There is a private practice with the shamisen, fingers feeling for the place where familiarity ends and new nuance begins. Lessons with a teacher who hears what is just slightly off and shows how to make it right with a nudge invisible to anyone else. Fittings. Needles slide through silk. Hems are checked. A slight repair here, a reconsidered accessory there. Meals are simple, not austere, balanced like a verse. Rice, a bowl of broth, pickled vegetables bright as punctuation. A walk may be taken, quietly, face without makeup, hair unadorned, through a neighborhood that knows how to see without staring. Perhaps a stop at a small shrine, a coin set in the box with the soft clink of wishes. Afternoon may bring a rehearsal with other performers, aligning steps, calibrating timing, deciding which dance will carry the night's mood like a lantern you hold up to alleys to see if they are safe. This is not a cloister. This is a profession in which the self is curated so that presents can be given generously. There are ledgers to look over, payments to confirm, a gift to send in, thanks for a kindness a patron showed to a younger apprentice. There are letters, a handwritten note with a line of verse, the ink just a shade more sepia than black, folded carefully so it opens like a thought. There is rest, too, a nap in afternoon shadow, so the night will not ask too much of the body. Why did a society make room for such a role? because culture needs mirrors that do not distort. The Geishas' blend of art forms preserved older styles by keeping them lived in. Dance steps that could have fossilized stayed supple because they were performed not on a museum's empty stage, but in rooms where stories still mattered. Songs did not fade because they were braided into memory. The memory of a client who, years later, would taste a spring sweet and think of the night he first heard a lyric about river mist. Etiquette did not calcify because it kept moving through hands that poured and accepted cups, through bows that were small enough to be sincere. Even the makeup is cultural grammar. The white base is not disguise. It is a way to make expressions visible by candlelight, a way to let eyes and mouth speak more clearly across a room scattered with shadows. The red and black are punctuation, commas, exclamations, parentheses of warmth, and the hair is architecture, pinning intention into place. None of this is trivial. All of it is legible to those fluent in the codes, and yet for outsiders, the picture can look like distance. That is the habit of the unfamiliar, to confuse ritual with insincerity. But ritual is how the heart remembers its shape. Boundaries are not fences, they are frames. The frame of the Geisha's work is clear: artistry, hosting, conversation, performance. Within that frame, there is tenderness, but it is the tenderness of attention, not possession. There is intimacy, but it is the intimacy of shared atmosphere, not an entitlement to the person who created it. Misunderstanding blooms when a guest confuses being deeply seen for being claimed. The role exists to make an evening's company feel lit from within. It does not exist to surrender the lamp. You might ask, were there never relationships that crossed the professional boundary? People are people. Affections sometimes spill. But the exceptions do not rewrite the rule any more than a rare storm redefines a climate. What matters is what the profession, at its disciplined center, asks of its practitioners and promises to those who engage it with respect. In many ways, the Geisha's art is a study in calibrated proximity, close enough to feel companioned, distant enough to keep dignity intact on both sides of the low table. That calibration is the work of years. It is why an apprentice learns to speak in a voice that sits in the air like steam, present, warming, never clinging. The morning is pearl gray, the sort of light that makes rooftops look brushed with quiet. Somewhere in Kyoto's Gion district, a sparrow purls a small song from a telephone wire. Below, a Norin curtain stirs in a doorway like a drowsy breath. Inside the okiya, the training house, a kettle thrums. Today the house moves a little earlier than usual. There is an appointment with the calendar. One of those hinge days when a life turns on nearly invisible hardware. Stitches, strings, and a length of snowy silk set along the nape of a neck. You and I will sit softly in the corner as if we were another pair of sandals lined neatly by the threshold, and watch the making of an artist the way a gardener watches a peony open, petal by patient petal, knowing that the bloom is not the sum of its parts, but also that each part matters. Before the poetry, there is the broom. To pretend otherwise would be to miss the pulse of the profession. A girl arrives at the okaya as a shikomi, an in-house trainee. Her job is to learn the house the way one learns a lullaby, by humming it until it fits in the mouth without thought. She polishes wood until it remembers its shine. She learns the smart, soft clack of sliding doors that close without complaint. She times the rice and the tea. She can tell by a fingertip to the tatami how humid the afternoon will be. These tasks are not beneath the art. They are the soil that roots it. If you can feel a room with your hands, you can hold an evening with your presence. On some days, the shikomi follows older geisha in a choreography of errands. The streets teach how to walk in zori sandals without slapping the heel, how to keep silk from catching a splinter of door frame, how to tuck a laugh behind your teeth until the moment it will land like a feather, not like a pebble. At first, she is invisible by design, absorbing, listening. The Oka-san, the house mother, watches with a precise kindness. She knows when a girl is trying too hard to be delicate, the way a child might grip a pencil until the letters wobble. Gentle hands, the Oka-san will murmur, not meaning weakness, but exactness. Evenings vibrate with the comings and goings of engagements. The shikomi waits up for the older women to return, takes their coats, helps unfurl the day from their shoulders. Sometimes the stories tumble out, warm with laughter. A guest who recited a poem and forgot the last line. A shamisen string that broke mid-song and turned into a joke so graceful you could hardly see the seam. A new tea suite dusted with kanako that tasted like childhood and thunderheads. The shikomi does not yet belong to those rooms, but the rooms begin to belong to her imagination. Soon, a different sort of lesson begins. The house pairs the apprentice with an older sister, an oni-san, whose role is to show by doing. The pairing is not casual, it is a kind of artistic adoption. The oni-san has a way of holding herself in a room, an ear for the music between words, an instinct about when to nudge a mood and when to let it settle. The apprentice will learn these things not through lectures, but through proximity. This phase has a gentle name, Minarai, learning by watching. Minarai looks, from the outside, like a girl in exquisite attire sitting quietly at a banquet. It is more like standing in the shallow end of a river while reading the current. She studies where laughter pools, where it runs thin, which stories loosen shoulders. The oni-san turns the evening like a potter's wheel. The apprentice feels the change in tone at her own fingertips. When guests bow farewell and the sliding door hushes shut, the two of them will walk home through lantern-stippled alleys discussing the anatomy of the night, a living dissection, respectful and precise. "Did you notice," the oni-san might ask, "how the banker's smile turned true only after he told us about his sister's cat?" There is the doorway. Next time ask him about childhood. People will not refuse a memory. One evening, the Oka-san spreads a length of fabric across the low table. It is long, heavy, with a tail that seems to carry weather. "Your obi," she says, almost offhand, which is her way of marking a milestone without jarring it loose from the flow of days. The apprentice will soon step forward as a maiko. The folks in the neighborhood already nod to her in that particular way, respecting the yet-to-bloom. A maiko's appearance has a season of its own. Her hair is dressed into warashi-nobu, an elegant architecture whose loops and red cords turn the head into a careful topiary of intention. Kanzashi ornaments crown the whole, blossoms that change with the month, bits of silver that shiver in candlelight like small bells without sound. The long-sleeved kimono sways with youth, not childishness, but the bright promise of craft gathering itself. The hem is padded, so that each step is a brushstroke the floor can feel. The first time she steps out in the full ensemble feels like a sunrise to those who have been watching her learn to breathe inside the role. Neighbors peek from shop doors to catch a glimpse, like farmers looking at a field after a good rain. The maiko's face wears the white base of makeup, but with the telltale touch of red on the lower lip alone, a signature of early days. Her collar is cherry red edged in white, a blush at the throat, marking tender beginnings. Lessons intensify. She studies dances whose gestures were brushed into being when her great-great-grandmother's grandmother was a whisper on a family tree. Each step is a word in a language that does not translate easily because it was built in rooms like these, under lamps like these, for the feeling of evenings that could only happen here. Her teacher counts time without a metronome. The rhythm is the human pulse, calibrated to the pace of pouring tea and trading stories. Music lessons test patience in the way good teachers always do. the shamisen can forgive very little. Fingers blister, heal, and harden, and one day the string stops fighting and begins to sing. There are songs that smile, songs that nudge, songs that ask for rain in a dry season. She learns them all, not as artifacts, but as tools. Etiquette becomes play. The party games of the ozashiki, the banquet room, require quickness and mischief. There is a game with fans where the loser has to mime a fox, a hunter, or a village girl depending on which way the wind of laughter is blowing. There is another with cups and claps that rewards the nimble and punishes hesitation with a friendly forfeit. Guests chuckle, their dignity softened but not dented. The Maiko learns how to tease without untethering anyone's pride. It is an ethics of levity. A geisha's calendar is not just days. It is petals, frost, the smell of new tatami mixed with rain. In spring, cherry blossoms ask for dances like sighs. In summer, fans become small wings to waft a coolness that is more idea than air. In autumn, maple leaves appear in kimono patterns like embers gathered against the chill. In winter, snow is a sound, thick and soft, and the songs sit lower in the throat, like warmth saved up. The city has its own pulse points. In Kyoto, spring brings the Miyako Odori, the capital dances, when theater curtains lift on a pageant of color and exactness. Maiko and Geisha perform choreography that seems simple until you try to hold your wrist just so and realize it is a line drawn through generations. An audience settles into a shared breath, the kind of attention that tastes like green tea, astringent at first, then clear as water. In those weeks, the okiya is a hive. Costumes multiply on racks. The air smells faintly of starch and silk. Laughter fizzles and then hushes when the okaya-san raises a single eyebrow. The house is busy, but its busyness is devotion, not hurry. Festivals return each year like reliable friends. Small shrines in side streets shrug on their lanterns. Offerings bloom on altars. Neighborhood children trail streamers. The Maiko walks carefully through these days, both participant and witness. She knows which stall fries the tastiest octopus balls, which old carpenter will recite a poem if gently begged, which alley echoes best for practice steps when no one but the laundry is looking. Seasons tighten the knot between performer and place. Her art is not portable in the way a violin is. It is site-specific, like moss on a stone that only grows in the angle of this garden wall. Let's look under the roof where all of this is made sustainable. The okiya is a business, plainly and without apology. The house pays for lessons, wardrobe, upkeep. The apprentice incurs a debt that is repaid in work as she begins to earn. If that sounds cold, think again of the garden. A trellis is not a chain. It is a structure that allows the vine to reach its shape. Good houses do not fleece. They cultivate. The okaya-san keeps ledgers with a calligrapher's neatness and a mother's memory for who needs new dance slippers and who is overdue for a day of rest. In the neighborhood, there is another crucial engine, the tea house, or ochaya, which acts both as booker and gatekeeper. The okami-san who runs it is a mistress of suitability, matching guests to the right combination of performers the way a chef chooses courses that sing together. She also guards reputations with velvet firmness. A guest who stumbles into disrespect is gently corrected. One who persists finds his calls returned with a frequency that approximates never. Boundaries are an art form here too, and the neighborhood, its old name is Hanamachi, the flower town, protects its artists without grand declarations simply by making certain things impossible to book. There is a registry office, the kenban, where names and engagements are logged. It is bureaucracy, yes, but with a ceremonial hum. Names are more than names. They are short biographies, a line of characters that links student to teacher, house to neighborhood, art to time. When a new Maiko receives her professional name, it is offered like a cloak, warm and weighted with expectation. It will be the name guests ask for when they whisper to the Okami-san, "Tonight, if possible, may we have—" Sometimes a roomer tries to come in with its shoes on. We have to meet it at the threshold and invite it politely back out. The most stubborn roomer says the profession is a cover for something else. But the codes of the Hanamachi are explicit about the frame of the work: artistry, hospitality, performance. You can feel the truth of it by how teachers teach. They do not spend a second coaching flirtation. They spend hours enunciating a lyric until the vowels turn like carp under a surface of water. They care about how a sleeve moves with a knee in the second phrase of a dance. They fuss over whether the plum blossom ornament is exactly right for late January or better reserved for the first week of February, when hope can be tasted but winter still carries its weight. Another roomer confuses one historical practice for the whole, painting over nuance with a single, unfortunate brush. Precision matters. Customs have shifted across eras and neighborhoods. Post-war hardship warped lines in places where poverty made everything negotiable. But the profession's disciplined center, the nightly making of a room where art is hosted, did not change because some people, outside the craft or under duress, used its name for survival in other contexts. If you listen not to gossip, but to the rhythm of training, the scale tips back to what is repeatable, teachable, and on purpose. Let's step into a single day and let it stretch. The winter light slants low at mid-morning. In the practice room, a heater hums like a distant drum. Above it, a kettle bickers with itself. The dance instructor taps a fan against his palm to keep time. The Maiko feels her muscles negotiate with memory. There is a move called Hanagasa, where the hat of flowers arcs just so. Her wrists remember, then forget, then remember at a deeper place, like a creek finding a buried channel. After an hour, the room smells of effort and tatami. Clean, straw-sweet, with a trace of winter wool. Lunch is humble, served in bowls warm enough to coax out the flavors. Rice that is exactly the right side of tender. A miso that tastes of earth and sky. Pickles that punctuate the softness with brightness, like syllables in a short poem. The Okaa-san eats quickly, then disappears to the office to return 2 calls and write a short note to a patron recovering from a minor surgery. We look forward to sharing a quiet song when you are well. Meanwhile, please accept this box of yokan, sweet enough to encourage good dreams. In the afternoon, fittings. A kimono's sleeve has been re-hemmed to correct a whisper of asymmetry. The seamstress, who has worked with silk long enough to be part silk herself, slips the garment onto the Maiko's shoulders and tilts her head so the world aligns. "There," she says, "now the crane has a sky." The Maiko laughs softly, mostly with her eyes, and bows in gratitude. Tiny care given to fabric is care given to the self, the house, the evening ahead. Before dusk, a nap. Curtains pulled to a content twilight. The body lies down with the knowledge that it will rise to be seen, to see, to hold space for others without losing its own outline. This is not small work. Sleep becomes part of craft, the restorative silence that allows empathy to be renewable, not draining. Now the hinge day we promised. After months and years measured in steps and strings, the Maiko approaches erikai, the turning of the collar, to become a full geisha, or in Kyoto's dialect, a geiko. It sounds simple. Change the red-edged collar to pure white, shift the makeup to mark maturity, adjust the hair and the style of kimono toward a quieter strength. But it is an inner rite too. One thinks of coming-of-age ceremonies elsewhere, the ring slipped on, the cap tossed, the candle lit. Here, the gesture is at the nape, where vulnerability sits. The line of white is a small horizon. Cross it, and the view changes. In the room, there is concentration without solemnity. The Oka-san is briskly affectionate, like a bird disciplining wind. The Oni-san is serene and a little misty, remembering the day her own collar turned. The hairdresser, who has known the Maiko's head as a terrain of pins and ornaments, works with a tenderness that is almost the same as pride. When the white collar lies against the neck, the room lets out a breath it did not know it was holding. Walking out into the street, the new Geiko finds that the very pavement feels different, although it is the same stones she has trod 1,000 times. The neighbors see her and adjust their smiles, not larger but deeper. A child points. The mother nods in a way that says, "Yes, remember this shape of day." Somewhere, a shutter clicks. Somewhere else, a memory is filed under Our Neighborhood, Our Artists, Our Ways. With the collar turned, the bookings broaden. The Geiko chooses her calendar carefully, guided by the Oka-san and the whisper network of the Hanamachi. She knows the kind of table where her stories will land like petals, not pebbles. She knows which fellow performers bring a complimentary temperature to the room. This dancer's cool wit, that singer's honeyed alto, the shamisen player whose tempo holds a conversation as if it were a fragile bowl. Money flows, and with it responsibility. She begins to erase the training debt with each engagement, and the ledger becomes a story about choices. Some evenings are accepted out of loyalty, others out of curiosity, others out of the clean arithmetic of rent and rice. The Geiko starts a small fund. Nothing grand, just the quiet practice of storing away for silk repairs, for a new instrument, for a small gift to a teacher on the anniversary of the first song. Entrepreneurs by any other name would call it strategy. Here, it is simply adulthood. The line between work and life is not a wire to be walked in fear, it is a braid. The Geiko's friendships with other women in the neighborhood are a twine of laughter, advice, and practical exchange. Your comb, mine tonight, that keeps the fabric from fraying. They trade recipes and rumors and routes to the theater least likely to be mobbed by tourists on a Saturday when everyone suddenly loves the idea of traditional dance. They take care of one another's throats with ginger tea, one another's calves with quiet reminders to stretch after a night of sitting. Let us revisit an evening, but this time stand where the Geiko stands. The door slides open on a room already fragrant with cedar and citrus peel. She surveys it in a glance that is both kind and tactical. 4 guests, 2 new, 1 regular, one who looks like a friend of the regular. The regular's posture says he has brought someone he respects. The new men's shoes by the door say they are used to comfort. The Okami-san murmurs the necessary introductions, and the evening begins. She adjusts the temperature of the room with small choices. A brisk song at first, to cut the awkwardness, then an invitation to talk about the confection in the dish, uguisu mochi, bush warbler sweet, a green that forecasts spring. The regular brightens, tells a story about his grandmother feeding birds in winter. The new guests soften, picture their own elders, find common ground in memory rather than resume. She asks a question that starts, "When you were small?" It is the oldest trick in the book, and also the truest. Faces change. Later, during a game, she lets herself lose once to the most nervous guest, who needs to feel safe above all else. He becomes the fox. He plays it with surprising charm, ears pricked with his hands, the whole table clapping the beat. The win unknots him. He will tell this story tomorrow in his office and be, for a week, kinder. Tonight, he is simply at ease. None of this is manipulation. It is stewardship. She tends the ecosystem of the table the way a gardener opens a spot between shrubs so that a flower can find the sun. When the night folds, The thanks are sincere. The regular catches her eye as if to say, "You saw what I wanted this to be." She bows, not obsequiously, but with the shared knowledge that evenings are collaborative works of art. The guests leave a little taller, like coats that have been shaken out and put on properly. When the door hushes shut, the Okami-san and the Geiko smile at one another in the way professionals do when a plan has landed so smoothly it looks like fate. After the evening, the walk home is a blessing. The silk whispers, the street hums. Once inside, the Geiko puts away her ornaments with careful hands. Each pin returns to its resting cloth like a soldier to a barracks, clean, accounted for, ready for tomorrow. She washes her face slowly, watching her own features re-emerge from the stage light white. It is a relief not because the makeup was a mask, but because the body appreciates any punctuation, now public, now private, now art, now rest. Sometimes she writes before sleep, not a diary exactly, more like a series of small postcards to herself about the day's textures. The banker laughed like a cracked bell, then like a proper one, after the story about the warbler. Remember to ask the flower shop for plum twigs early. Last year they sold out. Practice that bend on the final note. It wants to be arc, not angle. These notes keep the days linked like a string of lanterns, each one lighting the next. And there is the question of tomorrow, not in the anxious way, but in the way a craftsperson always has a next thing to make a little better, a little truer. The Geiko's sleep is not empty. It is seeded. Overnight, the mind distills the night's social chemistry into understanding that can be poured again when needed. In the morning, there will be tea. In the afternoon, there will be music. In the evening, there will be people, and the art of making their company into something they will remember when the weather changes. The hanamachi itself remembers. It holds stories in the corners of eaves and in the way shopkeepers nod. There was a winter when snow fell so silently everyone felt they were walking in a paused song. There was a summer the river swelled and spared the tea-houses by exactly one hand's breadth. There was a year when a young Geiko danced a flourish so perfectly the old men in the back row swallowed in unison, and an old woman whispered, "Again I am 20." These are the stories that keep a profession from turning brittle with reverence. They make the art not a relic, but a living conversation between the present and all the evenings that came before. Once, late, a foreign visitor stood in the alley, staring at a poster for the spring dances, trying to understand what he wanted. A shopkeeper came out to water a pot of iris, and, without looking up, said in a kindly voice, "If you wish to see properly, book through the tea house. If you wish to see only costumes, there are films." The foreigner laughed, thanked him, and later did both. A film on a plane home, an evening in a tea house when he returned. He kept the program from the performance for years, tucked into a book he loved, and sometimes, while waiting for sleep, he would take it out and remember the curve of a wrist against a fan, the color of a kimono, the exact shade of a persimmon skin. Erika is a hinge, but hinges continue to turn. The white collar is not a finish line. It is a promise to keep arriving with more gravity and more lightness at once. The Geiko grows into quiet. She chooses her jokes more slowly, and they land deeper. She lets silence work for her more often, trusting that a room can hold a beat without dropping it. She wears colors that do not shout because they do not need to. Her face in the mirror is the same and different. The eyes have learned to see at once the atmosphere and the details, steam on a cup, tension in a jaw, a curl of fog outside the window that wants to be welcomed into the evening like a fifth guest. When she teaches, because teaching comes, the way afternoon follows noon, she leans on questions instead of corrections. "What did you feel just there?" she'll ask a nervous Maiko who fumbled a step. "Where in your body did the rhythm leave?" The student finds it in her ankle, or her breath, or the place in the ribs where worry roosts. Then they begin again. This is how an art moves through time, not as commandments, but as conversations with good bones. And so the profession continues, day by day, collar by collar, season by season, not as a frozen tableau of someone else's idea of tradition, but as a set of living rooms where people come to be restored by art that was honed to the shape of human company. Outside, the sparrow has long since flown. Night sifts down. The kettle's last warmth is poured into one final cup. In the okia, shoes are aligned, pins are counted, the ledger is closed. The city sleeps, kept company by the low music of people whose work is to make people feel human in one another's presence. Tomorrow will begin again with polish and practice and the turning of many small collars, napkins, sleeves, glances, toward kindness. Sleep now if you like. We will carry on next time through a broader street. How Geisha influenced fashion and poetry, how they navigated war and rebuilding, how their entrepreneurship shaped neighborhoods, and what it means, in a world that keeps speeding up, to choose an art that insists on the pace of breath. The night opens like a fan. First a soft snap, then a hush as silk finds the air. In the alley, lanterns blink as if agreeing with one another. Yes, this is the hour when stories loosen their belts. Inside a quiet room, a tray carries the small moon of a porcelain cup. Steam walks upward, slow and certain. Tonight we'll linger with the textures that hold the geisha's world together, fabric that speaks, combs that count the months, poems kept in the mouth like lozenges for the spirit, and the way a woman who is both artist and entrepreneur can make a whole neighborhood breathe at the pace of grace. A kimono is not just something worn. It is a sentence in a language with grammar and rhythm. Stand close, and you'll find seasons stitched into sleeves, sprigs of plum in late winter, when hope is still a secret, pleated fans and blue waves when summer heat asks for the idea of water, chrysanthemums when autumn is a brass instrument, low and golden, pine boughs when winter draws its clean lines. The geisha, or geiko, here in Kyoto, does not dress to be looked at so much as to align the room with the month's inner weather. Patterns are chosen like songs. A subtle asanoha, the hemp leaf motif, signals resilience and growth. Tortoiseshell hints at longevity. A scattering of maple leaves is not merely pretty, it is a way to invite the idea of change into a room that might otherwise be holding its breath. Even color has temperature beyond hue, a blue that tastes of river shadow, a persimmon orange with a faint echo of smoke, a white so quiet it lets other colors speak first. There is practical magic in construction too. Layers manage warmth without fuss. Padding at the hem coaxes each step into a glide. The obi ties the whole sentence together with a final clause. It's not placed just so. Assertive, not loud. And because a wardrobe is an archive, gowns travel through years like reliable friends. A beloved bolt of silk is let out or taken in. A frayed lining is replaced. A sleeve shortened as the wearer's role shifts from apprentice's shimmer to a mature artist's glow. The garment remembers the bodies it has sheltered the way paper remembers the pressure of a pen. If kimono is a sentence, hair is punctuation. The styles carry news. The apprentice's elaborate wear-shinobu, with its loops and red cords, lifts the crown like a small stage where ornaments, kanzashi, perform quietly. These ornaments keep time. January's plum buds, bright against winter. March's soft peach blossoms. June's hydrangea, like handfuls of rain. September's bellflower, a cool blue with an autumn pulse. The viewer who knows the code smiles twice, once at the prettiness, once at the correctness. For the fully fledged geiko, hair settles into calmer architecture or is covered by a simpler shimada, leaving the drama to the face's conversation with candlelight. The change is not a subtraction, it's a refinement, as if the art has learned how to be visible without raising its voice. Combs slide with a whisper like oars in still water. Pins disappear into the dark gloss of the style and reappear in the mind's eye as tiny commas telling the evening how to pause. The white foundation is not a mask, it is a lantern. By candle and shoji-shaded lamplight, complexion can be the first thing to vanish. The base returns the face to the room, the way snow returns the landscape to dawn. Red and black draw the map. The eyelids line like a brushstroke, the mouth's careful bloom. For apprentices, color keeps to the lower lip at first, a promise of voice. Later, the full mouth speaks with the complete sentence of maturity. At the nape, 2 or 3 small triangles of bare skin, sanbon ashi, peek through the white. A suggestion of vulnerability, yes, but also a marker of care. The way a calligrapher's best work always leaves a breath of paper between ink and edge. Conversation with a geiko is not chatter. It's a lyric stitched without thread. She may begin with the weather, but listen, the weather is always code for something human. The river looked tired, she says, meaning perhaps that she saw your shoulders carry home an invisible weight. She quotes a haiku that tastes of citrus and fog. She asks about the sweet on the plate in a way that invites a memory. Stories lean out of guests like ivy finally finding a wall. Poetry arrives as garnish and medicine. A line from Basho, light as a sparrow's footprint, can rescue a silence that's begun to curdle. A comic senryu, tossed like confetti, releases laughter without cost. And when grief sits at the table with a stubborn back, the geiko chooses a poem that makes space for it without letting it swallow the room. The art is not literary snobbery, it's social listening, honed. She is fluent in the language of care. The ozashiki games, played with fans and cups and a cadence in the hands, are more than frivolity. They break the crust of self-consciousness on the surface of a guest and let the warmer person underneath emerge. The rules are simple, the forfeits kind. A clumsy gesture becomes a joke no one has to pay for. A quiet guest finds he can be a little silly and survive it. The evening shifts from performance watched to atmosphere shared. When people go home imagining they were charming, it's because the geiko made it true. Behind every serene room is a desk with papers aligned like tiles. An okiya succeeds by keeping art solvent. Fees are set not to inflate status, but to sustain craft, studio time, instrument maintenance, kimono care, lessons with teachers whose ears are microscopes. Debts incurred during apprenticeship are tracked with cool fairness and repaid as the artist's calendar fills. A good oka-san will nudge her charge toward engagements that grow skill and reputation together, some intellectually chewy, some financially brisk, some that simply keep the relationship map warm. Tea houses, ochaya, play impresario and guardian. The okami-san at the helm is a conductor whose baton is a telephone and a memory for what delights whom. She arranges evenings like tasting menus. This dancer's crisp wit alongside that singer's velvet tone. A shamisen player whose quicksilver tempo pairs with a geiko who tells stories that land like feathers. She also enforces boundaries with a softness that does not bend. A guest who confuses atmosphere with entitlement finds doors becoming aesthetic objects rather than portals. What looks like an individual performer's orbit is really a constellation. Seamstresses and hairdressers are artisans in their own right, their calendars woven through the hanamachi's pulse. There is the milliner who can coax a winter plum from silk and wire. the instrument repairer whose hands smell faintly of cedar and resin, the calligrapher who writes the season's invitations like small prayers with addresses. Money moves between them in steady circles, the way water moves in a garden, seen in streams, hidden beneath stones, always in motion. Among geiko themselves, mentorship threads from house to house. Advice is given in the kitchen while soup steeps. How to decline an engagement that doesn't feel right without bruising anyone's pride. Whom to thank for an introduction with a box of sweets and a handwritten note. Where to buy rice crackers with just the right snap for a patron who cannot eat sugar but loves a treat that pretends to be one. The economy is not only cash, it's attention, reciprocity, and the well-run kindness that keeps a culture from drying out. As Japan threw tracks across itself and electricity drew new maps of night, the hanamachi did not fossilize. It tuned. Photographs began to carry images of geisha far beyond the quarter's borders. Some pictures flattened nuance into postcard exoticism, but others served as a portable archive, protecting hairstyles, sleeve lengths, and dance poses from erosion. The artist learned to meet the camera with a gaze that said, "You may look, but you will not own the meaning." Trains changed timing. Guests could travel farther, faster. Evenings could be arranged with a different cadence. Radio and records sneaked melodies into kitchens and parlors. A shamisen lesson might now be accompanied by a gramophone's polite crackle. The geiko adapted without throwing away the bones of the craft. Tradition was not a glass case. It was a living organism, cautious about diet, eager for fresh air. There were years when the lanterns dimmed. When war braided itself into daily life, leisure shrank, silk was repurposed, gatherings contracted. Some houses fell quiet, others kept a pilot light of practice alive so there would be something to rebuild. Women who could hold a room learned to hold a neighborhood, organizing rations with grace, keeping spirits from cracking with small songs that didn't ask the heart to believe what it could not, but reminded it how to breathe. After, rebuilding was not just wood and paper, it was mood. People needed rooms where dignity could be recovered without ceremony and joy could return without embarrassment. The hanamachi stepped carefully back into the light, honoring what had been lost by making space for what could yet be shared. The first public dances after dark years were not spectacles, they were homecomings. Audience members cried quietly, not because the choreography was sad, but because it was intact. Businesswoman may sound too loud for the geiko's kind of commerce, but the word fits if you lower its voice. She tracks her bookings with the care of a gardener tracking rainfall. She invests in silk the way another might invest in stock, diversified, durable, with an eye for pieces that can be reworked rather than discarded. She builds a small cushion of savings so that kindness can be extended without panic, covering a junior's lesson when the month runs lean, commissioning a new song from a composer who needs the encouragement of a deposit. Some artists open their own houses in time, becoming okaya-san to the next generation. It is not an act of empire. It's an act of faith that art, handled correctly, pays forward. A good house has a smell, stewed tea, clean tatami, a trace of incense carried on someone's sleeve. It also has a sound. Two women laughing at the same moment from different rooms, then remembering to be quiet because a student is practicing a difficult passage. Tourists arrive with cameras, and the neighborhood learns the choreography of coexistence. Signs appear asking for respect, for distance. Pamphlets explain that the artists are on their way to work, not an exhibit. The geiko, walking in the dusk, feels the lens on her back like a moth against glass. She keeps her pace. She is neither hostile nor performative, and the restraint is its own lesson. Some visitors lower their cameras, chastened by grace. Others do not, and the street absorbs it the way a river absorbs pebbles without changing course. Inside, the art continues to exist at human scale. A joke laid on the table like a folded napkin. A dance that never quite looks the same twice because no dusk is exactly like another. A final chord hung in the air long enough for the room to hear itself in the echo. In a world that scrolls faster than breath, the Geisha's profession insists on a different metric: attention per minute rather than content per minute. An evening in a tea house is a contract to honor the exact people who have shown up in the exact weather of their lives. It is not nostalgia. It is maintenance of the part of us that knows how to be present without performance anxiety. And the business scaffolding, those ledgers, those carefully chosen investments in fabric, training, and relationships, proves that slowness can be sustainable when it is structured with intelligence. The Hanamachi is not immune to time's pressure, but it has an immune system, rituals that clear away noise, teachers who have seen fashions come and go and trust wrist angles more than trends, neighborhoods that understand the spiritual physics of a bow performed sincerely. When people leave these rooms feeling more human than when they entered, the craft has done its work. The alley outside is cooling. Somewhere, a Maiko laughs at a joke told by a carpenter buying late-night noodles. A cat slides under a parked bicycle. A lantern lets itself go out. Inside, combs are wrapped, silk is hung to rest, instruments are nested in their boxes like birds in evening trees. The Okao-san writes one last note in the ledger and closes it with a touch that is almost affectionate. Sleep finds you easily here. It borrows the kimono's weight, the poem's lightness, the shamisen last vibration. Tomorrow we'll step into other rooms, the theater where spring dances wake the city, the registry office where names become futures, the small shop where a hairpin maker keeps the months in drawers. For now, let the evening fold itself around you the way an obi gathers a gown, firm enough to hold, soft enough to forget you're being held. Dawn combs Kyoto with pale gold teeth, and the city, polite as ever, offers its hair. Shop shutters yawn open. A bicycle bell rings like a single raindrop. Someone in a side street shakes a rug and releases a small snowstorm of yesterday's crumbs. Inside the theater, where the spring dances will soon begin, the air is a patient hush. Dust motes like notes waiting for instruments. A broom moves with priestly care. On stage, a painted pine leans into a wind that exists only when the audience breathes together. The house manager checks rows, checks exits, checks a sense that is not listed on any plan. Readiness. Today we will sit with the season when the Hanamachi, the flower town, quiets its ordinary evenings and unfurls a pageant. We'll watch rehearsals that taste of green tea and effort. We'll step into the registry office where names have weight. We'll visit small shops where month and minute share a counter. And because art, like any garden, needs irrigation, we'll follow money as it moves, not as gossip, but as lifeblood. The result is not cold arithmetic. It is the sum of decisions made by people who know how to bow without lowering their standards. The theater is older than all but the oldest tree outside. Its curtains remember hands, some trembling, some serene. Spring, capitalized by custom, brings the Miyako Odori, dances of the capital, to Gion. Elsewhere, sister quarters light their own lanterns, Kyo Odori, Kamogawa Odori, Kitano Odori, each with its palette of steps and moods. Rehearsal arrives like rain in a rice field, heady, essential, every day at once the same and not. On stage, the choreographer's fan clicks shut, opens, clicks again. A metronome made of bamboo. He is not stern, only exacting, because exactness is kindness when an art would like to live a little longer. The geiko line up in soft-soled tabi, their stance a careful geometry, knees alive, spine generous, wrists remembering the line their teachers drew into them years ago. The shamisen player tunes with the logic of a stargazer. Strings must stand in a constellation with the dancer's breath. A singer's voice tests the acoustics with a phrase about spring light on river stones. The sound lands where it should, in the folds of the velvet or in the audience's rib cage, depending on fate and practice. A stagehand, quiet as a poem, moves a screen painted with irises. Someone brings cups of tea that steam like fresh thoughts. A Maiko on the cusp of her debut in the big program wears concentration like a hood. Her Oni-san, older sister, stands beside her without standing in front of her, the art of mentorship reduced to body language. You can. I'll be here if you wobble. The chorus pieces come first, lines of women tilting like meadow grass, sleeves understanding wind. The individual solos are smaller storms, a wrist describing a gull at the river mouth, a fan closing with the sound of a decisive letter, eyes that fold a room into intimacy without claiming a single person inside it. In the wings, children of the neighborhood peek like sparrows at a bakery door. They are shooed gently. Still, the future peeks back. The spring dances are time kept in a different jar. Day after day, afternoon performances unroll like scrolls, then are rolled up again and placed back on the shelf. Audiences hush at the same places and, unpredictable as weather, break into small, surprised laughs at different ones. A woman comes 3 times in a week because the first time calmed her. The second time made her remember a cousin she loved. The third time felt like spring letting go of winter's hand. An older man sits near the back and watches the footwork, as if he could save the world by memorizing angles. Backstage, kimono move like a forest, trunks of color, leaves of patterns, birds of ornament hopping from rack to rack. Dressers, artisans of split-second grace, coax arms through sleeves with a magician's speed and a nurse's tenderness. Hairstylists carry a month in their pouches, pins like meteors, combs like crescent moons. Seamstresses stitch emergency sutures in silk while the stage is still vibrating. The orchestra, shamisen, koto, flute, shares glances, nods. They've traveled this road together for years, but never in the same weather twice. At intermission, the lobby smells of citrus peel and faint incense. Programs are folded and unfolded, as if the act might change a name inside. There are cherry sweets. There are paper fans. There are mothers telling children in whispers why it matters that sleeves fall with that precise weight, why a bow is interesting if you know what a good one holds. The children nod as if they've understood. The truth soaks in later, the way tea stains a cup. The kenban, the registry office, is not glamorous. It feels like a school that likes grown-ups. A wooden box on the desk holds seals. A ledger remembers ink in a formal hand. Here the names of Geiko and Maiko sit in patient lines, linked to houses, to teachers, to permissions. It is administrative, yes, but if you listen, you can hear story. The registrar knows whose grandmother danced the spring number in 1963 with a fan like a blade of dawn. She knows which 2 houses haven't spoken since a misunderstanding in a typhoon season, and which apprentice writes thank-you notes with a calligraphy that would make a monk nod. Licensing hovers like weather, most of the time a sky, occasionally a storm. The office ensures the right to perform, the right to host, the right to book, the right to teach. Those rights are not abstract. They are tethered to duties, to train, to protect the reputation of the neighborhood, to keep the art's frame steady even as the painting inside shifts with every season. When a new Maiko receives her professional name, the registry stamps the air with a solemn joy. The name is chosen for sound, for meaning, for lineage. It is spoken aloud by the Okaa-san as if setting a bowl on a table. Here, for you, keep it well. The Kanban coordinates bookings with the tea houses, the ochaya, and sometimes feels like a bird's nest of telephone lines designed to hold a surprising number of eggs. The okami-san, the tea house managers, are virtuosos of memory and discretion. Thursday, after the accountant's audit, he'll be heavy, one murmurs into the receiver. Send her with the stories that end in laughter. Or, a diplomat, first time, likes literature but hates showing off about it. Give him the quiet, dazzling one. The registry doesn't need to hear the adjectives. It knows the addresses. Walk with me to the comb maker's. The shop is narrow, long, and smells faintly of camellia oil and cedar. Drawers are labeled not by object but by time. New Year, early spring, rain, heat, insects, singing, maple, frost. The artisan opens peach blossom and lays a hairpin on velvet. It is the color of childhood painted carefully into adulthood. He speaks softly to the geiko who has come to choose. This, he says, will be right if the month is cold, but the air has already decided to forgive us. He is not a poet by hobby. He is a poet by trade. And the trade is understanding what a room wants to see before the guests know they want to see it. Down the block, the dye studio hums. Vats like moons hold color that is almost patience. A bolt of silk is lowered into persimmon, lifted into evening, dunked into river light. The dyer's hands have learned to read temperature by the conversation between skin and steam. He laughs when the Oka-san asks for the blue that makes a banker tell a story, but he knows exactly which blue that is. There, on the shelf, 2 jars to the left of nostalgia. We'll temper it, he says, so it doesn't out-talk her. The instrument repairer works with cedar curls on his lap, listening to shamisen bodies the way a doctor listens to hearts. He taps, tilts, listens for a wolf note, adjusts a brace, sighs when the resonance finally collects itself like a flock. Do not leave her in a window, he reminds. Even an instrument likes not to be looked at all the time. Romance has its arithmetic. An okia's ledger lives in the same drawer as its teapot. Pages are ruled lightly. Figures sit in even columns. Notes and memos are tucked like bookmarks here and there. Income from engagements flows in gently irregular streams. Outflows are more regular. Tuition for dance, for shamisen, fees for the registry, hair appointments, silk maintenance, a small stipend for the house's seasonal altar, envelopes for the stagehands when spring performances end. The Oka-san runs a finger down a column and nods, satisfied not because the number is large, but because it is healthy. Health, in a house, is measured like a body. Warmth in the hands, clarity in the eyes, appetite for work, and rest in proportion. Debt from apprenticeship is repaid not in a rush, not in a drag, but in a rhythm. The house is not a bank. It is a school with a kitchen. A smart Oka-san guides her geiko toward engagements that develop both art and solvency. This poet's salon will not pay like the hotel banquet, she says, but you'll come back more interesting than you went in. Do the poet, then let the hotel pay for next month's obi lining. Wisdom looks like a shopping list when it is right-sized. Investments are not all silk. Some are relationships. A gift to the hairdresser at New Year. A letter to the stage manager who smoothed a crisis when a prop cracked at the hinge. A visit to a patron's aged mother who once attended spring dances in a different theater and remembers the pop of fans like rain on a roof. These are not manipulations. They are the glue that keeps a neighborhood from scattering when time shakes it. You can hear etiquette maligned elsewhere as frost on a flower. Here it is irrigation, unseen pipes that keep a garden alive. Bowing is not a cliché but a daily practice in physics. How to lower yourself without losing center. How to rise without suggesting you owe more than you meant to give. Pouring a drink is a language. To pour for someone is to say, I am paying attention. I know you are here. To refuse to let someone pour for herself is to say, I would like to participate in your being at ease. The Geisha translates without talking about translation. Even laughter has rules, not to suffocate joy, but to make room for everyone to breathe. A joke that risks humiliating one guest is discarded, even if it would win a bigger laugh from the others. The Geisha keeps a private shelf of jokes that only work when everyone's dignity is upholstered properly. On good nights, humor becomes a communal object, a lantern set at the center of the low table so that all faces are lit equally. The Hanamachi is porous to the city's changes, but not gullible. When a fad announces itself with symbols, the neighborhood listens with one ear and one eyebrow. Technology arrives, first as novelty, then as ordinary, only after it has been asked what it wants from the room. Cameras were taught to behave, phones now attend with their voices off. Social media arrived with the posture of a parade. The Hanamachi received it like rain, useful for flowers, dangerous for foundations. Houses set ground rules with the grace of laws delivered on a hand towel. No faces without permission, no schedules published, no texts about private rooms turned into public entertainment. A few guests bristle and do not return. The neighborhood remains itself and sleeps well. After the long night of war, relief needed midwives. The first public performances were not triumphant, but tender. Artists who had kept the language of the body alive in cramped rooms brought it back to stages that felt at first too large, too bright, like returning to a house after a hospital stay. Audiences wept when costumes reappeared, not for silk, but for the idea that continuity had not broken, only thinned. Economically, houses were careful. Silk was refurbished before it was replaced. Hair ornaments were mended by craftsmen whose own businesses had been bruised. Austerity taught efficiency without cruelty. The Hanamachi did not pretend nothing had happened. It designed rituals that could hold grief the way a tea bowl holds heat, to be felt, not scalded by. One spring, the dances included a number about wind through pines. It was slow, low to the ground, and when it ended, people clapped as if trying not to wake someone sleeping. From time to time, a Geisha's name shines beyond the neighborhood. She writes a memoir. She is photographed in a way that respects her gaze. She tours with a company that carries Kyoto's spring to far cities. Fame, when it arrives, is handled like a guest who speaks too loudly. It is welcomed, fed, asked to sit down. Then it is taught the house rules. A celebrated artist returns home and bows to her teacher's portraits, because even a bright lantern is lit from a wick someone else trimmed. These names do a kind of external diplomacy, reminding the wider world that the geisha's art is not frozen, not scandalous, not quaint. At their best, they become bridges. At their worst, they threaten to turn attention into extraction. The neighborhood's immune system activates. Elders insist on nuance. Younger artists learn to say no in several polite dialects. Houses coordinate so that opportunity becomes bread, not sleet. To watch a geisha work across years is to see her build a private library. The volumes have titles like How to Help a Tired Person Pretend the Day is Not Heavy and When to Let Silence Do It. There is a chapter on grief disguised as irritability, a shelf of dances for days when the humidity is a character in the room. A collection of songs that sound like late autumn apples taste, tart first, then sweet, then a lingering clarity like good water. There are borrowings and returns. A line from an actor becomes an aside that rescues a table from the brink of pettiness. A gesture learned from a flower arranger's hands finds its way into a dance about waves. The library is not catalogued by anyone but the artist. It is carried in her body the way a map is carried by a bird. When she teaches, she lends carefully. "Try this," she says to a Maiko whose fingers are too eager. "It is not mine. It belongs to the room." We talk about performance as if artists do it to audiences rather than with them. In the Hanamachi, the guests co-author the night. Their shoes by the door say what kind of day they've had. The tilt of a jaw writes the first paragraph. A table that begins with 4 strangers can end with 4 conspirators, plotting nothing more than a gentler tomorrow. The geiko steers without looking like a captain. When the night succeeds, the guests leave believing it was partly their doing, which in fact it was. A diplomat learns, mid-laughter, that charm is different from dominance. A young engineer, treated like someone whose stories have worth, returns to his office and listens to his junior with fresh ears. A widower, whose grief gnaws like a small, tireless animal, sits through a song about snow on bamboo and feels, for the first time in months, that he can be cold without being alone. None of this appears in the ledger. All of it appears in the city's morning mood. Kyoto is sometimes accused of enjoying its own manners too much, like a person who cannot stop checking if her hairpin is straight. But in the partnership with the Hanamachi, the city's punctiliousness is a gift. Permits are negotiated with an understanding that quiet is an asset. Street repairs are scheduled so that spring performances can begin without the accompaniment of jackhammers. Police know when to ignore a little after-hours clatter that is actually a loadout of props, and when to ask a tourist to stop blocking a doorway with enthusiasm. The tourist bows, vaguely embarrassed. The officer bows back, more precisely. Everyone learns something about civility as public infrastructure. A Maiko once said, over soup one chilly evening, that her training had made her a better citizen. At first glance, the statement seems grand. Then you watch her in the city. She picks up a dropped glove and trots to return it, bowing as if she were on stage and the glove a cue. She greets the street sweeper with the same tone she uses for a dignitary. She arranges her schedule so that once a month she can read stories to children at the tiny library near the river. No one told her to do this. The craft tilts the heart toward attentiveness, and attentiveness tends to leak into public life. From an economist's altitude, the Hanamachi is a cluster of micro-enterprises, each interdependent, many female-led, all sensitive to seasonality and reputation. From street level, it is a place where ambiance is product, and care is both process and output. The risk is obvious. Ambience and care are hard to price correctly in a market that prizes speed and spectacle. The answer, refined over generations, is redundancy, multiple streams of small revenue rather than one grand, scary pipe, multiple kinds of value tracked, money, goodwill, artistry, resilience, multiple mentors, so no apprentice's education depends entirely on a single temperament. There are lean months and harvest months. The difference between survival and flourish is often a letter written at the right time, a refusal that preserves dignity, or a gamble on a new choreography that refreshes the spring program without making elders feel exiled. The neighborhood studies itself the way gardeners study a slope, where water wants to run, where it pools, where roots hold best. Let's sit in the balcony the night before the curtain goes up. The house is dark, except for a single work light on the stage, a lonely sun with a halo of dust. 2 dancers stand in the pool and rehearse a moment they cannot quite agree upon. Their debate is quiet and full of respect. "If the fan closes here," the older one says, closing it with 2 fingers, "the sound tells them to breathe." The younger tries it and nods. The smallest change lifts the entire phrase like a hinge that had been a fraction stiff. In the aisle, the stage manager writes something on a clipboard that might as well be a love letter. Cue 15. Softer. Out in the alley, a cat calibrates the darkness and decides it is safe enough to hurry. The air smells a little of river, a little of fried batter from a stall that survived the afternoon. Somewhere a Maiko ties and unties a practice obi, iron in her hands, patience in her eyes. Somewhere an Okaa-san counts envelopes and counts her blessings that the troop avoided flu this year. Somewhere a seamstress finishes a hem and presses it closed with an iron that exhales like an exhausted god. The audience arrives with the small bustle of people who are proud of where they live and hopeful about the afternoon. Programs are passed from hand to hand with the hushed enthusiasm of recipes. When the curtain lifts, there is a fractional pause that tastes like the edge of a cold stream before you step in. The first dance is an overture of sleeves and wrists, a geography lesson in grace. A child points and is hushed with a smile. An old man in the fifth row shifts his cane into a more comfortable permission to cry later if he needs to. What happens next is both ordinary and unrepeatable. The melodies are the ones they rehearsed. The choreography is what the choreographer insisted upon. The lighting cue 15 is indeed softer. Yet the day's weather, the memory each dancer woke with, the exact loneliness or joy each guest carried across the threshold, conspire to make a version of the program that will never exist again. This is why people return, not for novelty, but for the promise that attention will produce something particular, each time, from a recipe that is partly the same. At intermission, a vase in the lobby holds plum twigs at that perfect brink between bud and blossom. And suddenly, 3 conversations converge upon grandmothers. How they taught you to wait. How they made cookies that broke politely. How their hands smelled of starch or cigarettes or rain. A geiko glides through, not working, simply passing, bowing to a cluster of volunteers who staff the ticket table with diligence and all the necessary change. She thanks them as if they had tuned a piano. When the final number ends with a bloom of color that looks like a garden waking, there is a silence before applause, that heartbeat of collective consent. Yes, we were here for this, together, at once. The clapping is not thunderous, it is warm rain. Bows are exchanged, gratitude made physical. The curtain falls with the soft authority of a well-timed door. Backstage, the relief is a flavored air, jasmine of success, salt of sweat, smoke of effort. The women laugh quietly, hands on one another's shoulders as if steadying boats that are mostly still. The choreographer's fan finally rests. The musicians wipe strings and lips. The stagehands loosen ropes and tighten coils and tell each other the old joke about the prop that once broke and turned into the best moment of the night. A child who peeked through rehearsal visits with a mother who knows everyone because she sells rice in the market. Someone places a tiny bouquet into the child's hands, careful of the pins. "For watching properly," says the dancer, and the child grows a centimeter in gratitude. The mother bows. The child bows too deeply and is caught and raised by 2 gentle hands. In time, they say, meaning not just the bow. The Okaa-san returns to the house when the sun has tipped past the roof line and does her inventory of the day. 1 hem to be redone, 1 dancer to be scolded mildly for fidgeting, 3 thank-you notes to write, 1 admonition to herself to rest. She stands for a moment by the altar and lights a stick of incense for teachers whose names the younger women recite without having ever known their faces. The smoke rises like a note that cannot decay, and you, at home, perhaps, or in a quiet hotel room, let your body know it is allowed to relax. You have been breathing in time with an art designed to remind breath of its proper size. The spring program will run its course, and then ordinary evenings will return to tea houses where cups knock softly, and stories arrange themselves like coasters under the conversation. But the season will have done what seasons do when attended to with care. It will have taught the city how to be itself again for another year. When you close your eyes, you might still see a sleeve in motion, a fan closing like a thought, a stage held by the hush of people who believed together for an hour in attention. You might feel the logic of a ledger that keeps kindness solvent. You might hear the smallest of sounds, Q15, softer, and perhaps you will sleep like someone who has been poured a good cup of tea, steady, warm, briefly, exquisitely complete. The city exhales after the spring performances the way a garden exhales after rain. Colors deepened, edges softened, the soil underfoot a little more generous. Lanterns rest, tatami breathe. In the okiya, combs are wrapped like sleeping birds. Tonight we will move more slowly than even a tea-house evening. We'll stroll through time and look at the rules that shape the geisha's world, the misunderstandings that clung like burrs to traveling clothes, and the quiet economics that let art keep its lights on. We'll visit the streets of Edo, then Meiji's new light, then the modern corridors where a profession learned to survive change without surrendering its grammar. Settle in. Imagine a cup warming your hands. The story will be soft, but it will not be shy. In the 18th century, when Edo, today's Tokyo, swelled like a tide, and Kyoto and Osaka kept their own steady luminescence, the floating world had addresses. Pleasure quarters, licensed districts such as Yoshiwara in Edo, Shimabara in Kyoto, Shinmachi in Osaka, gathered entertainment under rules that designed both freedom and containment. The shogunate's bureaucracy could be fussy and paternal, but it also protected patterns that, once set, acquired a dignity of their own. In those quarters, boundaries mattered. Courtesans, oiran, were legally distinct from the entertainers who would become recognized as geisha. The courtesan's art was elaborate and famously formal. Their appearance shouted nobility. Within the walls, with obi tied in front, a heraldic blaze of hairpins, a gait slowed by extravagance. The geisha's art, by contrast, was companionable. Music, dance, wit, and the social physics of making an evening equal parts sparkle and rest. Regulations insisted the two roles remain different, partly to protect business monopolies, partly to prevent confusion, partly because each craft needed a clear frame to make sense. Sumptuary laws, those old governors of display, sketched outlines of behavior. Geisha were to keep attire beautiful but restrained, obi tied at the back, colors in the family of season rather than the family of spectacle, hairstyles elegant without being thrones. They could perform in tea houses and at banquets. They were not to solicit in the manner of courtesans. Their currency was skill, not promises left heavy in the air. When the men who made rules were unimaginative, the women who kept the art alive were creative within the lines, a playful pattern that only revealed itself at the cuff, a turn of phrase that positioned laughter where it did the most good, a dance that seemed simple until a wrist failed to match its music and the error showed how exacting simplicity can be. In Edo and in the Kansai cities, another profession shared the evening air, the taikomochi, or haukan, male entertainers, wits and MCs who once took the lead at parties and whose jokes and drum beats kept sake moving and conversation aerated. They were older cousins of what geisha would become. Over time, as female geisha refined a repertoire that folded dance and music into conversation, the men's prominence softened, though in some districts they remained prized for their sly timing and good memory for guests' preferences. The room was a village, many roles, each with a purpose, each with rules that said, this way, not that. The term itself, Geisha, contains its compass. Ge for art, sha for person. A person of art. The neighborhood's old slang, karyukai, the flower and willow world, said it more poetically, flowers for transient beauty, willows for pliant strength. The point was never disguise. It was revelation by degree. You entered a room and became more yourself because someone who had practiced attention for years offered you a pace at which you could be human without self-defense. Apprenticeship codified this ethic. The shikomi stage grounded a girl in the house's breath. Minarai taught her how to learn by watching. The Maiko years brightened her edges while keeping her center steady. Erike, turning the collar, announced mastery without a trumpet. Registries, kenban, recorded names and permissions like a town ledger, not merely to regulate income, but to honor lineage. Who learned from whom? Which style of dance? Which school of shamisen? Which teacher's stern kindness lived on in that bow? And yet, when foreigners came with binoculars made of rumor and distance, misunderstandings multiplied. Some looked into the pleasure quarters and saw only a blur. They could not parse the difference between a courtesan's appointment and a geisha's engagement, between an evening arranged by an ochaya and an arrangement made by other trades. Language tangled the rest. A single word, geisha, was easier to pack into a conversation than a paragraph about legal categories and neighborhood norms. Later, during the hungry years around and after the Second World War, desperate women outside the profession borrowed the prestige of the word to sell what hardship demanded. Foreign soldiers learned that the syllables opened doors, not into art, but into transactions, and carried home stories lacquered with certainty. Cinema and novels made myths comfortable. A camera, if pointed at a costume without context, can flatten a life into a silhouette and file it under exotic. A novelist who relishes romance more than research can take liberties that travel farther than footnotes. The cure for such ease is slow seeing. Sit in the room. Watch who pours. Listen to how performance is woven through talk. Notice the economy humming politely underneath. A roster of teachers and technicians, a calendar aligned with festivals and seasons, a ledger designed to keep training paid for without selling the craft's backbone. Of all the confusions, none tangled more vines than the cluster of words around a girl's transition from apprentice to full-fledged artist. In Kyoto, the language and the rituals sit like stones set precisely in a garden. A Maiko's first grown hairstyle, the ofuku, arrives with its own ceremony. Later erikai, the turning of the collar from red-edged to plain white, marking her debut as a geiko. The term mizuage, when encountered in older sources, could refer in some regions to a coming-of-age celebration associated with a change of hairstyle and status, a social rite, not a sale of the self. In other contexts, outside the disciplined center of the hanamachi, and especially in eras and places where prostitution's laws and labels sloshed under pressure, the word clung to practices that had nothing to do with geisha's craft. Sediment from those rivers settled onto the public imagination, and soon a term that belonged to one shoreline was mistaken for water everywhere. The neighborhood's own grammar never placed the geiko's art on that scale. Her training was in the muscle memory of dance, the discipline of music, the ethics of conversation. Teachers corrected wrists and vowels, not flirtations. Hairdressers marked the calendar on the head. Seamstresses stitched the seasons onto silk. The Okaa-san recorded debts and payments with a clarity that honored the apprentice's future. When a collar turned, What was being announced was not bodily availability, but artistic readiness, social competence, and entry into a network of professional obligations and rights. Language can slander by laziness. The antidote is precision delivered without scolding, the way a tea instructor corrects a clumsy whisk with, "There, let water do more of the work." With the Meiji Restoration, the country's old scaffolding shook. Western clothes, telegraph wires, trains, light everywhere, both literal and metaphor. Some elders feared that the Hanamachi would turn into a museum, then into dust. Instead, the neighborhood tuned itself like an instrument. The geisha's role became, if anything, more clearly artistic. As Japan performed its modernity on a world stage, the need for hosts who could represent grace, not as empty ceremony but as persuasive hospitality, increased. Diplomatic evenings needed choreography. Business salons needed oil that didn't stain. Geisha, especially in the new capital Tokyo's Shinbashi and in Kyoto's Gion, learned to sit between old poems and new contracts without blinking. Music absorbed influences at the edges. A Western chord tucked into an arrangement here, a rhythm borrowed from a military band reinterpreted on shamisen there. The core stayed local and low to the ground. Inoue-ryu dance in Kyoto's Gion kept its supple geometry. Schools of song maintained their accents. The tea ceremony, passed along Urasenka's lines and others, continued to prefer steam's whisper over a kettle's shout. Guests tasted continuity not as nostalgia, but as competence. "We are changing," the room said, "and we remember who we are." To think geisha is a single dialect is to believe every river sounds the same. Tokyo's Shinbashi geisha developed a style crisp and metropolitan, their engagements threading through the new economy's boardrooms and ministries. In Asakusa and Kagurazaka, textures shifted. A little more theater in the air, a history of popular performance that kept humor forward. Kyoto's Gion held to its elegance without anemia, silk that didn't shout, dance that used stillness as punctuation. The Inoue School's choreography folding sleeves into sentences you could almost read if you stared long enough. Osaka, merchant proud, favored wit with a quick currency exchange rate. Kanazawa, on the Sea of Japan, treasured refinement as if it were snow that must not be stepped on too quickly. Each Hanamachi had a registry, a set of tea houses, a circle of artisans, and a reputation shaped by centuries of evening weather. Cross-pollination happened, of course. Artists visited, learned, adapted, but the roots stayed local, not out of parochialism, but because soil matters. A dance grows from the room it was taught in. A joke grows from the neighborhood it won't insult. Paper gives dignity to a profession. It says, "We are not a rumor." Licenses, issued and checked, defined who could perform and teach. Registries tracked names not as a surveillance device, but as a way to make lineage visible. Contracts with tea houses clarified fees and obligations. Even the envelope culture, money tucked in crisp paper offered with two hands, turned commerce into courtesy, which in turn protected everyone's face. There were disputes, naturally, over bookings, over late payments, over the inheritance of a house when an Okeya-san aged and the question of succession arrived like a guest no one wished to offend. The neighborhood had mechanisms for these, committees that preferred mediation to pronouncements, elders who remembered precedents, a bias for keeping quarrels indoors. Not secrecy, privacy. The distinction matters in any craft that traffics in people's evenings. Reputation was cooked slowly. A geiko's name was a recipe. Ingredients: dance school, musical specialty, conversational style. Techniques: timing, judgment, restraint. Seasonal variations, which festivals she shone in, and a flavor profile known to the neighborhood. "Ah, her jokes are like citrus," Someone might say, they wake the palate without biting. One bad night did not spoil the dish. 10 careless nights did. Houses helped calibrate reputation's heat. Too much exposure and you curdle. Too little and you never thicken. Stories traveled in polite channels. An Okami-san would murmur to another, "She handled the ambassador's silence well," meaning book her for guests who mistake volume for presence, or "She needs a winter off stage to steep," meaning steer lighter, give more lessons, protect the core. Praise carried a responsibility. A highly recommended artist could not afford laziness. The neighborhood had staked its face on hers. Let's open the drawer where numbers sleep. Income came from engagements, ozashiki and tea houses, public performances in spring and autumn, occasional cultural demonstrations for schools or visiting dignitaries. Outflows were predictable. Tuition to dance and music teachers, payments to hairdressers and seamstresses, registry fees, contributions to theater upkeep, the quiet charity that keeps a neighborhood humane, apprenticeship debts, costs advanced by the Okiya for years of training and wardrobe were repaid in sensible installments. A wise Okasa-san refused to let a ledger drive an artist into panic. A panicked artist cannot host properly. Savings were strategy, not hoarding. A geiko put aside enough to weather illness, a slow season, a surprise repair to an instrument. Some invested in small property, others in workshops, funding a comb maker's expansion in exchange for favorable rates and first look at cherry season designs. The portfolio was not the point. Stability was. The art is fragile if a single gust knocks it over. Diversified streams turn wind into song rather than catastrophe. Contrary to myth, money did not buy indiscriminate access. Tea houses curated tables with an eye to temperament, history, and safety. A guest known to test boundaries might find his evenings shorter, earlier, or more expensive, handles fitted so the neighborhood could move him without strain. Patrons who supported apprenticeships quietly were repaid with reliability and rooms arranged with their comfort in mind, not with license. That is the core misunderstanding from outside. Respect was the currency and the climate, not a purchasable exception to rules. Good guests learn the house style quickly. Arrive a little early so conversation can warm. Praise without presumption. Let the host set the evening slope. Accept correction as a kindness. Tip the staff who made everything look effortless. The reward was not scandal, but serenity. The dignity of belonging to a room that made you your best self for a few hours. People get addicted to many things. Gentleness, once tasted, is among the most honorable. Where do dances live when no one is moving? In muscle, teachers' spines, students' wrists. In paper and ink, notation systems that look like rain mapped onto rice paper. In recordings, crackled voices teaching melodies to generations unborn. In fabric, hems that learned how far to swing, sleeves that remember the weight of a gesture. The Hanamachi kept an archive, both official and informal. Costumes were catalogued, programs preserved. Notes made on which choreography worked under which lighting and in which theater's humidity. A city's weather leaves fingerprints on art. The archive noticed and planned. There were near disasters. A teacher died with steps untaught. A flood kissed the bottom drawers of a wardrobe. A lane's worth of shops shuttered one season, and the neighborhood felt its bones loosen. Each time, the response was a focused kindness. Teachers elsewhere were invited to lend knowledge. Garments were aired and mended with community labor. Patrons were asked to sustain a year of transition, and did because reputation had meant something for decades, and reciprocity is a muscle you can keep strong by using it. Every profession breeds a few luminaries whose names travel beyond the block. Some write memoirs as gentle as rain on a shoji screen. Some become ambassadors of a kind of attention the world is hungry for. Some are pulled into controversies not of their making when outsiders project fantasies into the room and then blame the furniture. The neighborhood's response to spectacle is educational rather than combative. It offers tours that explain without pandering. It encourages interviews that ask about training, not titillation. It refuses to let rumor be the loudest voice at the table. A famous geiko once said in a talk to school children that her proudest moment was not a magazine cover, but the evening a shy apprentice finally landed the timing of a joke and the whole room laughed with, "Not at her." Fame puts light on faces. Craft puts light into them. The Hanamachi keeps score by the latter. The war year's lesson was simple and stern: keep the pilot light. When silk went to uniforms and instruments dulled for lack of care, some houses folded, others consolidated. Teachers taught in kitchens. Songs were sung low. After, beauty was rationed like sugar, then returned in small, careful measures. Public dances resumed not as spectacle, but as communal therapy. Planners chose programs that remembered restraint: wine through pines, snow on bamboo, river in thaw. Lushness came back later, when audiences were ready to feel abundance without guilt. Scarcity taught efficiencies that became virtues. Obi were refurbished instead of replaced. Hair ornaments learned the art of mending. Even jokes were repurposed, honed to a finer point by the need to do more with less breath. The neighborhood learned to regard prosperity as a chance to deepen, not merely to expand. When you've survived a winter, spring tastes different. Modern tourism arrived with curious eyes and noisy pockets. The Hanamachi replied with manners. Signs requested distance. Pamphlets explained difference. Designated events offered a way to see without trespass. The geiko walking to work is not a museum. She is a woman on a schedule. Cameras learned to lower. Most did. The others revealed themselves and were handled by the quiet machinery of a community that knows how to keep its arteries clear. A word to a guide, a new route. The allyship of shopkeepers, who prefer visitors, who prefer respect. In exchange, the neighborhood gave public beauty. Festivals with song and dance meant for all. Seasonal decorations that made even a hurried commuter slow. Classes where a tea whisk became a lesson in physics and patience for children with sneakers and soda. The balance is ongoing, a daily choreography, but it is danced with goodwill and steady feet. Ask a geiko what the art has given her that carries beyond the tatami, and she might say, the ability to read a room as weather, the discipline to keep practicing when the plateau feels endless, the confidence to decline with kindness, the understanding that business is a kind of caretaking when done properly. She might add one more, a respect for frames. A frame, be it law, rule, or ritual, lets the painting inside change without dissolving. When artists help maintain frames, they are not conservative in the fearful sense. They are gardeners who know trellises keep vines from choking themselves. Managers from other worlds, tech, finance, healthcare, have sat in these rooms and learned, without being taught, that leadership can be a bow that invites rather than a voice that overwhelms. The lesson sneaks home with them and appears later as a meeting that ends on time with everyone's dignity intact, or a presentation that balances wit and humility, or a policy that defines boundaries so clearly kindness has room to operate. Let's set a scene where law meets art without friction. A city official, newly appointed to a department that oversees cultural districts, is invited to an evening at a tea house to learn, not to be entertained. He removes his shoes. Someone quiet shows him where to set them so they do not turn into an obstacle. He sits. Tea arrives, a small ceremony, not the showpiece kind, but the daily one, respectful of time. The Geisha hosts, with a tone that says, "Welcome to the ecosystem you help regulate." She does not flatter, she educates by making the room function perfectly. Over the hours, the official learns what a regulation feels like at human scale. A curfew is not a number. It is the difference between craftsmen who can sleep and a neighborhood that frays. A licensing requirement is not a stamp. It is the chain of accountability that keeps a teacher's lineage from being diluted into merchandise. A noise ordinance is not a scold. It is a promise that singing will be audible and sirens rare. He leaves with a fuller sense of stewardship. Not power, not surveillance. Stewardship. Policy improves. The room is thanked with a letter, then with grants that focus on preservation without fossilization. Law has had its tea. The work of untying myths is not a crusade, it is housekeeping. Each year, schools receive visiting artists who explain the craft, what is learned, how long it takes, why the seasons matter, why the makeup is light and not mask, why a collar turns and what it means. Museums curate exhibits that refuse sensational captions. Documentaries focus on rehearsal rather than rumor. Book clubs choose memoirs by practitioners, not just novels about them. And the discussions end with phrases like, "I didn't know," said not with embarrassment, but with relief. Ignorance is heavy. Knowledge is better to carry. The myths never vanish entirely. Someone will always prefer a lurid story to a true one told in a gentle voice. But a city can change its reflex. When a tourist asks on a corner if the Geisha houses are where the exciting things happen, a shopkeeper answers, "Yes, music, dance, and the old etiquette that makes guests brave enough to be kind." The tourist blinks, laughs, and perhaps goes to the right door. What does tomorrow ask? Flexibility around the waist. The belt of a kimono, the obi, keeps you upright and gives your stride its curve. It cannot be cinched so tightly that breath has to fight. The profession experiments at its edges. Workshops for students, collaborations with theater troupes that respect the core forms, online lectures that bring elders' voices to listeners far from river and stone. Costs are managed with creativity. Pooled wardrobes, shared rehearsal spaces, smart scheduling that spreads heavy months across more shoulders. Mentorship remains the backbone. An aging teacher whose knees object to floor-level practice moves to a chair and corrects posture with a glance. A young Geisha translates elders' metaphors into terms a modern ear can digest without losing flavor. Houses diversify engagements so that a short downturn in tourism does not become a famine. More local gatherings, more corporate salons that want depth instead of glitter, more presence in schools where a bow can be a lesson in geometry and empathy at once. The night has folded itself into a calm square of dark, as tidy as a handkerchief in a breast pocket. Somewhere a clock counts in tasteful whispers. Somewhere a kettle newly emptied remembers heat the way a stone remembers the day's sun. For this last walk, let's enter a small gallery of lives. Quiet portraits of women who carried the art through eras and weather, and then step, unhurried, toward a soft conclusion. The door slides. Our socks find tatami. The air says hello in straw and cedar. She arrived at the Okia late in a winter that smelled of oranges and kerosene. Reading kanji was still a hill for her legs. She'd learned her name and the names of soups, but she could read a face at 20 paces. The Oka-san called it weather sense. When the house was busy, they let the child sit under the lintel while errands ran around her. She watched grown-ups arrive with collars stiff or loosened, shoulders like shutters open or closed, eyes that carried the week's temperature. She didn't know the words yet: resentment, relief, pride worn thin. But she recognized their shapes and learned their remedies. A joke told sideways, tea poured slower, silence held until it turned from awkward to merciful. As Shikomi, she could fold linens into rectangles that would make a regiment applaud. As Minarai, she learned to occupy a corner as if it were a good view, not exile. The first time she accompanied her Onei-san to an ozashiki, she noticed the nervous man's breathing quicken when the shamisen entered, then ease when the instrument paused, and the room's noises, cups, sleeves, soft laughter, reasserted themselves. "He needs talk before song," she whispered later, and her sister squeezed her hand in the kind of praise they didn't waste words on. When she became a Maiko, her hair carried flowers like a calendar you could wear, and her jokes were pills with sugar on both sides. A certain city official, important by title and not yet by temperament, visited often and treated his own opinions as if they were ancestral lacquer. She steered him toward stories about his mother's garden. He returned to offices a shade more breathable. Years later, when budgets threatened to pinch the theater, his signature appeared under a line that read, "Maintenance for cultural sites." He never said why. She never asked. The room had done its quiet work. Her erikai came on a day that rained the way paper absorbs ink. The white collar lay against her nape like a promise kept. In the years that followed, she built a reputation for being able to mend a night that had torn, a quarrel between guests stitched with a well-timed song, fatigue among performers eased by a story that let them sit back in themselves. When she opened her own house, she taught apprentices weather sense as a discipline. "Listen with your shoulders," she'd say. "They notice the draft first." Hearts are instruments. Instruments have scars. The shamisen player in our gallery kept his scar where only sound could see it. In his 20s, he had cut his finger on a sliver of broken bridge, and, in healing, the skin grew a small ridge that changed the attack of his first string. At first he sulked, then he listened. The ridge made the note slightly husky at the birth and perfectly clear at the end, a sigh learning to be a bell. He built a style around it, not in defiance but in gratitude. In rooms where conversation threatened to turn competitive, he slid that note into the air, and the room remembered softness without losing spine. He wasn't a geisha, of course, but he was part of the ecosystem. Booked by tea houses, woven into spring performances, paid from ledgers that favored reliability over spectacle. He taught girls who would never be virtuosos to tune with honor and to find, in their fingers, a place where intention and wood agreed. "Every instrument has a secret," he'd say, tapping the body with knuckles that sounded like a door being politely tried. "Ask it, and then stop talking while it answers." A winter influenza left him thin and older around the eyes. The neighborhood tucked blankets into his evenings, extra engagements placed where stairs were short and gratitude long, envelopes with enough weight to keep dignity upright. When he died, which he did the way a candle dies, still giving light even as it becomes smaller, a geiko who had often played to his songs wore for a month a tiny strip of black silk at the inner sleeve seam, invisible to guests but known to the house. Grief here is not a parade. It is a carefully folded cloth. Not every hero holds a fan. One, in this gallery, held a pencil as if it were a chopstick picking up a future. She came to the okiya with a gift for columns, the kind that sit beside words and the kind that hold up roofs. The oka-san put her near the ledger early, perhaps to keep her from fretting over dance steps that would not settle in her ankles. She took to numbers like rice to steam. "If art is breath," she said quietly once, "then the ledger is lungs." Her apprenticeship moved along in respectable measures, songs memorized, bows smoothed, makeup learned in a mirror until the hand steadied. And when she turned her collar, she turned toward management with the same precision. She negotiated silk the way some women negotiate storms with patience and maps. She discovered that two houses could share an inventory of certain pieces without the gods striking anyone down. She consolidated hair appointments so the dresser's schedule became a suite, not scattered pebbles in a dish. She set up envelopes for stagehands that were exactly correct every time, which made backstage a country of peace. Later she became an oiran, and the ledger's steadiness let her be kinder than a nervous budget would have allowed. She favored a policy she called soup first, meaning apprentices were never too hungry to learn. If you want grace, feed its body, she told a visiting businessman who asked, good-natured and clumsy, why the house kept such careful lunches. When asked, years later, how she'd kept the place solvent through a dip in tourism, she shrugged with humility's flair. We did not buy what we could borrow. We did not borrow what we could mend. In a room with low light and a kettle that looked like a small planet, a dance teacher corrected with lanterns, not sticks. Her childhood had been the kind where a door could slam and then make days tremble. She decided early that her rooms would never learn that language. So when an apprentice's wrist turned at the wrong angle and the step lost its reason, the teacher would ask, "Where does the wind enter?" The girl would blink, mystified, then feel for puffed shoulders, tight jaw, forgetting breath. When she found the wind, in the elbow, in the ribs, the step mended itself. "Good," the teacher would say. "Keep a window there, just a small one." Her generosity could have curdled into vagueness, but she kept it precise with ritual. Warm-ups did not change because feelings did. Vocabulary was taught in order and enforced with the kind of insistence that stands upright without a sword. She prepared students for the shock of audience by having them bow to a wall where photographs of elders lived. "Bow to the living, bow to the dead," she'd murmur, "and you can bow to anyone without bending your spine into fear." When knees objected to floor, she moved to a chair, and the room's respect did not shift by a grain. On the last day she taught, rain wrote thin lines on the garden stones. She sent everyone home early with a homework that sounded like a riddle. Tonight, practice not practicing. Let your body miss the dance. The next day, each girl's first step had the sweetness of thirst met. Some evenings break into weather despite best intentions. The host in our gallery, let's call her Sumair for the purple thread that ran through everything she did, specialized in storm nights. Once, a table gathered 4 men who liked each other on paper and could not, for the life of them, sit comfortably in the same hour. The air was a sweater worn too tight. Sumair floated a game in which everyone had to lose once in the first 10 minutes. Pride surrendered without casualty. Then she told a meandering story about a carp that learned to move with the current after tiring itself on the idea of going fast. She was not instructing. She was decorating the room with a thought. By the third course, the men were laughing. By the end, one had agreed to a compromise without realizing he'd wanted to all along. Another time, thunder threatened power. Candles emerged. Instruments became a second weather. Sumair chose repertoire that spoke softly to fear. Songs about lanterns and raincoats and how plum trees insist on hope. She poured cups the way field nurses adjust blankets. When a boom knocked the room into silence, she held the pause like a bowl and then set it down gently with a joke small as a sugar cube. People inhaled. The lights returned. Afterward, a guest wrote a letter to the house. "I discovered I don't need electricity to be brave." Sumair became an oiran and taught her juniors the tricky art of tension management. "If a room is a kite," she'd say, "you are the string, not the wind, not the paper, just the thing that keeps it from being lost." The Hanamachi's wardrobe can be a museum if someone listens to it properly. One seamstress, Her name written in the registry with a neat hand and a note about her taste for plum-flavored sweets turned her workbench into an archive. She kept cards tied to each garment, not just with measurements and repairs, but with nights. Worn when the hospital reopened. Worn when the festival returned after flood. Worn for the diplomat who apologized well. She argued gently for saving linings with faint fragrance, old incense, a memory of citrus, because they taught future wearers what seasons felt like. When a sleeve frayed, she didn't merely patch. She asked what personality the imperfect edge had acquired. "Do we honor the life this silk has had?" she'd say, fingers already thinking, "or do we insist it remember youth?" To apprentices, she explained stitch names as if they were relatives. "This one is aunt, she is strict. This one is cousin, she forgives. This one is grandmother, she holds without showing you the work." The dresses she mended walked into evenings carrying history like a soft perfume, noticeable in the mind if not the nose. At the end of each year she compiled a list of garments retired with thanks. The list read like a poem. Clouds at dusk, peonies rained on, river in heat, pine and frost. The neighborhood brought tea and listened as she read it. No one clapped. They bowed, which is a form of applause designed for fabrics. Not every path runs inside the lanes forever. One geiko stepped away after a decade, not out of frustration or scandal, but curiosity. She traveled, carefully, with savings folded into envelopes that smelled faintly of camellia, and watched other hosts work in other cities. She saw loudness used where softness would have been kinder. She saw good intentions wilt under bad lighting. She saw rooms engineered for spectacle, but not for sightlines that let shy people feel welcome. She took notes that read like recipes, more daylight when possible, seats that let older bodies rise without drama, 2 jokes each, maximum, let the guest be the sparkle. When she returned 3 years later, she asked permission to open a small tea house designed like a daylight room for late afternoons, events ending early so people could go home to sleep on time. Elders raised eyebrows as they should. She showed plans that used the past's intelligence and the future's habits. The house opened. Regulars included nurses, teachers, a barber who kept the neighborhood's necks tidy, and a train conductor who learned to time his announcements with courtesy from listening to hosts time their stories with breath. Her evenings had a signature, a song placed where a sigh would be, a cup refilled before thirst recognized itself, a proverb borrowed from an aunt who never learned to read but could sense a lie in the length of a pause. She managed receipts with the same care she gave compliments and sent apprentices home with leftovers wrapped like holidays in a handkerchief. "No one learns well on an empty stomach," she said, having once tried. Eventually, teachers become weather in a place. Their names are said when it rains in a certain way or when a wrist bends and the whole room suddenly breathes easier. One such elder, we might as well call her a climate, sat in the front row of spring performances after she stopped dancing, wearing colors that surrendered graciously to the stage. Dancers could see her, and knowing she watched was like dancing near a river, not a distraction, a source. She sent notes after shows that never used the word good carelessly. When a performance was truly alive, she wrote, "Tonight the sleeves remembered wind." When timing wobbled, she wrote, "Consider quieting the tea in the second measure." When a young singer found the roundness of a note she had chased all winter, the elder sent a single plum blossom wrapped in paper. No card. Everyone knew who, everyone knew why. At the year's end, the elder presided over a short ceremony in the registry office where names are ink. She wore a white collar like a horizon line and thanked the doorkeepers, the stagehands, the comb maker, the woman at the incense shop who refuses to sell inferior sticks. The speech had no rhetoric, it had addresses. People felt seen and went home generous. A man arrived in the district with a suitcase full of opinions and a schedule full of himself. He was not cruel, he was loud from habit. His first evening felt like a wrestling match with invisible rules he had not troubled to learn. The host, rather than shrinking or sparring, let the room be a soft mirror. She laughed when he was genuinely funny, not when he was merely loud. She poured with care. She returned the conversation to others with a hand so light it felt like his idea. On his second visit, his shoes by the door were placed properly. His voice, once inside, lowered of its own accord. By the fourth, he waited a beat before answering questions and discovered that listening, properly practiced, tastes like citrus after heavy food. He began to bow, at first too deeply, like a tourist trying to respect with his lumbar spine, later just right, like a person who knows dignity is a shared object. Back home, in rooms with fluorescent light and meetings that usually turned shoulders into armor, he kept something from those evenings, a measurable patience. People noticed without knowing its source. The neighborhood had exported a product it never claims on customs forms. She is not anyone's daughter, you know. She is all the children who have ever peered between the tails of an oiran to glimpse a future that fits their hands. She carries a school bag too big for her, and her socks don't match because mornings sometimes move faster than households. The first time she hears the shamisen up close, the sound finds a place in her chest where lonely things had been sleeping. She goes home and plucks rubber bands on an empty tissue box. The neighborhood's artisans recognize that look. They've seen it in their own childhood mirrors. Years later, she will choose a path, maybe here, maybe somewhere else, using that memory as a lantern. Perhaps she will enter the hanamachi. Perhaps she will be a nurse who times bandage changes by breath, a baker who counts needs like beets, a city planner who thinks about where benches should be so that elders can sit in conversation with sunshine. That is the quiet reach of this craft. It teaches not only those who practice it, but those who rub against it as children in lanes where lanterns calm the evening. These portraits do not try to prove anything loudly. They show the profession as a weave. Musicians, seamstresses, hosts, teachers, ledgers, licenses, linings, jokes, bows, soups, apprentices who write thank-you notes with ink that smells like a thoughtful morning. Laws form a trellis so the vines don't strangle themselves. Myths are dusted away with the regularity of housekeeping. Seasons keep time and also keep people company. If you listen closely, you might notice how many times the word care has walked through these rooms on soft feet. Care is the engine, not sentimentality, maintenance, instruments tuned, floors polished, reputations kept breathable, money tracked without panic, boundaries held so that intimacy can be hospitable and safe. A geisha's work is not to be a story someone owns. It is to be the host of stories that belong to the people who came and will leave better for having sat together. Before we turn out the lights, let's place this in the ledger one last time. Gentleness has costs: time, training, fabric, repairs, rent. Those costs are borne by a system that honors skill and schedules wisely. Fees are set to keep doors open, not to carve names into vanity. Savings are a shield against bad weather, not a monument to anxiety. Envelopes pass from hand to hand as if they were notes in a well-tuned orchestra. Crisp, respectful, regular. What does return on investment look like in such a place? A city that breathes more evenly. Guests who leave not just pleased but calibrated. Young people who see adults practice attention without humiliation. Elders whose expertise is used, not displayed like antique porcelain. Art that refuses to deaden itself into endless repetition because it keeps hearing the room. Tonight, this weather, these people. The Hanamachi understands something every stable culture eventually learns. Beauty and order are infrastructure. You maintain them with brooms, calendars, and the firmness to say no to anything that would make the art cheap in the morning after. That firmness is not rigid. It flexes with years and technologies. It bends without breaking because it knows what it is guarding, a space where human dignity feels inevitable. It's almost morning behind the dark. This is the moment when a lantern does its best work, not to fight the night, but to accompany it toward dawn. The geisha, the artist and businesswoman, the host and student, the neighbor and teacher, has always been such a lantern. People have called her many things. The true name is the one written on her registry card and in her teacher's hands, person of art. The craft did not survive by hiding, it survived by making rooms in which people remembered how to sit with one another without armor. That is not small. In times of rustle and racket, it is revolutionary in a whisper. If the myths knock at your door again, let them in for tea and correct their posture with hospitality. Explain the training, the performances, the boundaries, the economics. Do it calmly, with the confidence of someone who has seen the backstage and knows where the chords and counterweights live. The myths, properly hosted, may become guests who no longer wreck rooms. Night leans its forehead to the window. Lantern light is low and kind. This last stretch will be an easy path, a ribbon of street between the house where art is made and the city that sleeps easier because it exists. We'll gather what we've seen, training and trade, seasons and ledgers, myths corrected with tea, and set it down like neatly folded silk. No hurry. The kettle sighs. The shamisen echo curls into quiet. When you're ready, we'll close the door without locking it, so the story can visit your dreams. From the first footsteps in the licensed quarters, Yoshiwara's grids in Edo, Shimabara's gates in Kyoto, Osaka's Shinmachi streets, this profession tended a very specific flame. Not scandal, not spectacle. Company, curated. Song poured into conversation the way steam joins air. Dance as punctuation, not domination. All the tools are small on purpose. A fan, a three-stringed instrument, a sleeve with its own grammar. Teachers carried steps and melodies across centuries. Inoue Ryu in Gion with its clean geometry. Voices that can place a note like a cup on a tray. Etiquette that is irrigation, not frost. The Okiya, house and school and ledger, kept the continuity honest. Shikomi hands learned floors and fabrics before they learned dances, because awareness is posture's mother. Minarai eyes learned to see a room breathe. Amaiko's calendar lived in her hairpins and sleeves. Her erikai turned a collar and, with it, time. The Kenbon registry wrote names into a lattice of teachers and obligations. Paper as dignity, not as leash. Tea houses, ochaya, matched guests and artists with a conductor's ear. Around them, a ring of artisans, hairdressers with seasons in drawers, seamstresses who sew memory into hems, instrument repairers who listen to wood for moods. The business beneath the calm. In rooms where everything looks effortless, someone is balancing a budget with the serenity of a tea master. Fees aren't guesswork. They're arithmetic shaped by training costs, kimono maintenance, theater dues, and the regular kindness of envelopes for the hands backstage. Debts from apprenticeship are ladders, not traps, repaid in rhythms that don't strangle craft. Smart houses pool resources, share wardrobe staples, schedule hair and seam work as suites so artisans can thrive. A geiko's savings are a modest raft, silk repairs, a new song commissioned, a quiet cushion against flu season. Investments are practical and local, First, look at a comb maker's spring line, a small loan to the shamisen man who keeps the quarter in tune, a promise to the registry that the fees will arrive as expected. The profit is measurable beyond numbers, evenings that leave dignities intact, regulars who become gentler bosses, kinder sons, more attentive friends, a city that breathes in paragraphs, not push notifications. This is commerce as caretaking, and its ledgers are love letters written in neat hands. Boundaries as frames. We have met the gate where myths knock with muddy shoes. It helps to name what the frame holds. Geisha, Geiko in Kyoto are licensed performers and hosts. Their work is music, dance, conversation, and the social choreography that lets strangers share a table without armor. Sexual transaction sits outside that frame. The neighborhood's rules have said so for centuries, not as prudery, but as clarity. Confusions were born in proximity, pleasure quarters with many trades, and spread by distance, wartime poverty, foreign tongues, cinema that preferred perfume to truth. Inside the rooms, training tells the story better than any argument. Teachers correct wrists, not seductions. Registries track schools of dance, not secrets. Houses book programs, not promises. If a rumor insists, pour it tea and explain the calendar of hairpins. Myths often tire before the kettle cools. The taste of seasons. No art survives without breathing with the year. Spring's Miyako Odori, dances of the capital, turns Kyoto into a theater and a rehearsal room at once. Elsewhere, Kamogawa Odori, Kyo Odori, Kitano Odori bloom in their districts with signatures you learn to hear like dialects. Summer asks for fans and songs that carry coolness like a rumor. Autumn deepens color. Sleeves gather embers. Maple, chrysanthemum, moon. Winter refines, pine and frost in patterns, the low candle made into stage light by white base on a still face. Kanzashi count the months in flowers. Linings keep the weather civil. Tea sweets teach the tongue which chapter the year is reading. The people who make it breathe. We've walked past faces that deserve their bow. The Oni-san who mentors with body language. You may. The teacher whose questions are lamps. Where does the wind enter? The seamstress who keeps an index of sleeves that held history. The shamisen player who turned a scar into a style and taught listening as technique. The Oka-san whose policy is soup first, so grace has fuel. The Okami-san on the phone, matching a quiet, dazzling one to a diplomat who secretly hates boastfulness. The city official who learned, over a modest banquet, that a noise ordinance is a lullaby for culture, not a scold. The guest who arrived loud and left literate in silence. The child in the alley whose first instrument was rubber bands and a tissue box, and whose life, because a sound existed nearby, bent toward careful work. A profession of choice. The quiet thesis beneath these nights is agency. A geiko chooses her bookings with the Okaya-san's counsel. Some evenings that grow skill, some that pay silk, some that pay generosity forward. She learns to decline with kindness and to accept with conditions that keep the frame intact. With time, she mentors, opens a house, or designs a tea house that closes early so nurses can sleep. She curates her name the way a gardener curates shade. None of this is accident. It is enterprise, wielded softly and with a long view. How it meets the modern trains rewrote timing. Cameras brought far eyes into close streets. Radio and records offered models for phrasing. Social media arrived with drums. The Hanamachi triaged. Welcome what doesn't bruise the art. Teach devices to behave. mark some spaces as strictly in person. Public programs explain without pandering. Museum exhibits show rehearsal, not only costume. Workshops put tea whisks in school children's hands, so patience becomes muscle memory. Tourism learns to keep its distance. The district learns to offer ways of seeing that don't trespass. The rule that matters stays simple. If a change helps the room protect dignity and attention, attempt it. If it hollows either, let it pass on. War and repair. When silk thinned and evenings dimmed, the pilot light stayed. Teachers taught in kitchens. Songs survived at lower volume. Wardrobe was mended as if stitches were spells. After, programs chose restraint before abundance, wind through pines, snow on bamboo, so that audiences could return without flinching. Prosperity later fattened the calendar, but the ethic stuck. Refurbish before replace, mend before discard, gratitude before glitter. Resilience became muscle tone, not posture. Etiquette as infrastructure. Bows, pours, pauses. These are not decorations on feeling, they are conduits for it. A bow says, "We exist. Let's begin." A pour says, "I am attending. You are safe to relax." A pause says, "We can hold quiet together." The Geisha keeps jokes on a high shelf, never at a guest's expense, always at anxiety's. Games with forfeits teach play without humiliation. Even the way shoes face at the door is a courtesy to the future. When you leave, you won't have to turn your back to the room to go. Thousands of small courtesies add up to one large permission. Be yourselves, kindly. What the city gets. A neighborhood like this exports more than postcards. It returns citizens to their mornings calibrated. Managers run meetings that breathe. Teachers pace their lessons like conversations instead of drills. Cooks plate with season in mind. A barber times his chatter to the rhythm of a razor so no one bleeds. A planner schedules street repairs around festival weeks because quiet is an economic asset, not a private indulgence. The registry's stamps, the theater's cues, the shopkeeper's seasonal drawers. These become a city's shared clock. The last evening. Imagine one final ozashiki before we close. The room smells of cedar and citrus. Outside, rain lines the alley like kanji. A trio arrives, a scholar worn by travel, a neighbor who sells umbrellas and wisdom in equal measure, a young engineer with tired eyes. The Geisha reads the weather. First, a game to loosen shoulders. The shamisen offers that husky then clear note that persuades the room to forgive today. Talk blooms, grandparents, river levels, plum sweets that prove winter will end. A poem arrives not as quotation, but as garnish. A joke lands like a feather on water. Boundaries hold, warmth spreads. The scholar's voice lowers into ease. The shopkeeper's laugh becomes the evening's hinge. The engineer leans back without noticing he has stopped guarding his breath. At parting, bows. Envelopes change hands with practiced grace. In the alley, the umbrella man notices the rain is kind, not hostile. The scholar files a sentence in his notebook that will make his writing less lonely. The engineer decides to call his sister on the walk home. No one will list any of this on a balance sheet. The ledger still balances. Packing the lantern. If you're drifting now, let this be what you carry. A geisha is a person of art who runs a business of gentleness. She is trained in concrete things, dance schools, song forms, shamisen technique, tea etiquette, and paid for concrete work, hosting, performing, stewarding a room. Her world survives by clear rules and cooperative craft, not by rumor. Around her, a constellation. Okiya and Ochaya, Kenban and theaters, artisans and city stewards. Across eras, shogunate, Meiji, post-war, smartphone. She keeps a lamp lit at human scale so people can see each other's faces properly. That's all, and it is not small. When myths return, you don't have to scold. Show them the registry stamp and the spring program. Explain the hairpins that count months. Name the teachers. Tell a story about a storm night saved by a song about lanterns. Pour tea. Hospitality is stronger than argument. It converts while letting everyone keep their dignity. Curtain, soft as breath. A sleeve settles. The kettle's last whisper becomes air. Shoji screens keep their honey of light for a moment more and then let it go. Somewhere, a house mother closes her book. Somewhere, a teacher turns a chair toward the window to catch morning. Somewhere, a seamstress ties a final knot and bites the thread with a satisfaction you can feel without seeing. The street outside is rinsed and ready. You can sleep now with the calm of a guest who has been attended to without being owned. In the morning, remember one sentence if the whole gallery slips. They were not what rumor wanted. They were what a city needed. Artists, entrepreneurs, hosts of evenings, guardians of pace and dignity, women whose work made the world, for a few hours at a time, kinder. Good night. Let the lantern walk you to the edge of sleep and then turn itself down, trusting you know the way the rest of the way home.